Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Legal 500 and Diligence webinar, Defending Against Cyber Threats, Partnering with the Board to Govern Risk. My name is Joe Boswell. I'm head of the Legal 500's GC Powerlist series, and I'll be introducing and hosting today's session. This morning, we're taking a deep dive into an issue which affects everyone, from individuals to the largest companies in the world and everything in between, cybersecurity. So why did we decide to put this webinar together? I've got some stats to help illustrate why this is such a pertinent time to tackle this topic. Cybercrime costs are projected to reach heights of £1 trillion in 2022, amid an ongoing and inexorable rise in cybercrime. 62% of UK small and medium enterprises experienced an increase in cyber threats in the last 2 years. 48% of executive managers admitted their employees have not received cybersecurity training, slightly worrying. 32% of firms report having no cybersecurity function at all within their organization, which is maybe even more worrying. Ransomware attacks are massively up and have affected 73% of organizations in the UK recently. When you combine this with the fact that you have the data privacy angle to contend with as well, so non-compliance with GDPR can land you with a €20 million fine, or maybe 4% of your worldwide turnover. This is something that everyone needs to keep an eye on, individuals and the managers of the largest companies that currently exist. But fear not, because we have a fantastic panel ready to tackle today's topic. I'm going to introduce them in a second, but first I would like, if you will, some of you to answer this initial poll, which is, has your business been a victim of cybercrime? And the answers are yes, no, or not sure. Very simple. Okay, on our panel today, we have Henry Jang, Chief Information Security Officer at Diligent. In his role, he is responsible for all aspects of the firm's cybersecurity program. He previously served as CISO at Oppenheimer & Co., Head of Cyber Risk at Societe Generale, Corporate and Investment Banking USA division. He has also served on the customer advisory boards for a number of technology and cybersecurity companies, and you can read his regular blog posts, chapters in books and podcasts on the topic of cybersecurity. Asli Yildiz is Head of Legal at the Data and Marketing Association UK. She boasts a wealth of experience in legal risk management on corporate and company-related matters, distribution channels and systems, data protection, anti-bribery and corruption, competition laws, regulations and regulated markets, and M&A. Prior to her work with DMA UK, she was data privacy and cybersecurity lawyer at Taylor Wessing, and she was also a legal counsel at Canon EMEA. And last but not least, Joachim Fritschi, Group Chief Information Security Officer at GLS, where he has built the global security organization from the ground up. Prior to joining GLS in 2016, he was at Vodafone and Thomas Cook in various security management roles, leading teams. Right, so before we move on to our first topic, let's have a look at the results of this poll. I'm going to end it now. So, quite interesting, actually. Almost half have said they have not been a victim of cybercrime, which I'm a layman, but I find that to be slightly surprising. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think the definition of a cybercrime, right, sometimes is a cyber attacks occurs every day. We know that attempts are actually probably very frequent occurrence. I guess sometimes you have to, sometimes ourselves as a practitioner needed to define what is a cyber incident. Usually it's defined in cybersecurity procedure, but to us, cyber incident could be usually defined as a successful a breach of the computer system. By that definition, I think if we follow with that parameter, unsuccessful, if you have good protection, that sounds reasonable, but attempts probably much higher, right? That's kind of my own view from practitioner standpoint.
And a quarter of people are not sure. Which is also
I
Yeah, very honest.
Also, the maybe I don't know the audience now. Maybe more lawyers are on than maybe security people.
Maybe,
And
yeah.
when we know the things, obviously 50% they say because we dealt with the matter, which is a very serious one. But as Henry said, that sometimes there's attacks happening without a result, but is an attack, it's a cyber crime. So they don't know. That's why they put maybe 50%. Saying yes.
Okay, right. So our first topic is encouraging the board to create viable cybersecurity policies. So it's all very well you having a great idea about how to protect your company, but getting the buy-in from the business side could well be a different matter. With that in mind, I'm going to open up another poll. Answer this in your own time. The question is, well, it's a statement basically. The business leaders in my organization take cybersecurity issues seriously well before problems develop. If you agree with that statement fully, put 1. If you disagree with it entirely, put 5. And obviously, there's a sliding scale. So while that's being answered, I'm going to go to Joachim first. Yeah, what do you think is the best way to get the business people on board with your plans?
I think the most important thing is to focus on the why. Really make sure that they understand how security or cybersecurity relates to the goals or the mission of the organization. So why does it matter? Because everyone thinks, yeah, security is important, but the question is, why is it important for our organization? And then really dive into, is that we have legal requirements, we have business requirements, we have customer requirements, we have a high dependency on IT. How does it relate if something would happen? And then also, let's say, make the threat landscape a bit more practical. And it can be anything from discussing past incidents in your own company, incidents in, let's say, related companies, how that has affected their business. For example, at GLS, we took one example from a competitor that had a big breach, and we just looked at their annual stock, let's say, press briefing where they announced the losses, and then had some discussion, okay, what happened with them? And that makes it a bit more practical also, not just talking about the big cyber threat, but let's say also, what is the reality of the cyber attack if it happens, and what can be the impact to the real organization? That makes it a more, let's say, practical.
So basically taking practical real world examples, and I suppose it's easy when things are in the news, right? Like we've had a lot of big breaches and
well, I think it's also, it makes it real, because if you're talking about cyber threats and risk, this is always, you're the paranoid guy that has that glass ball and you're trying to predict the future. But why not look at the past, and let's at least look at some examples that happened in the same industry, in your own company even, where you were just lucky. You had a breach or you had a cyber incident, and well, the impact was minimal, but it could have been much worse. And so just diving into what could have happened if we didn't have that measure in place, or what happened at another company, and that makes it tangible, and not so much the scary cyber world that the board often doesn't understand exactly what that means and what could an attacker do. And what we also did, for example, I've done live hacking just to show them, because if you talk about hacking, they know the movies, maybe what happens in the movies, but they have never seen how easy it is to hack a system, and if it isn't properly secured, and you're a skilled person, and what you can do if you take over a mobile phone of someone, and that makes it, let's say, real for them.
Absolutely. Right, let's have a look at the answers to this poll. So encouragingly, of the people who are watching this webinar, about a third have said they have business leaders that are pretty much entirely on their side. That does mean that we've got, well, let's say for the bottom 2 answers is about a quarter. Obviously, a lot of you are advising. You've had various roles in different companies over the years. Does that chime with your experience? I mean, you know, has the mood changed from business people in terms of taking this seriously over the past few years, in your opinion? What about you, Henry? Have you got any thoughts on that?
I guess my generic statement, yes, certainly cyber has become a much more a visible topic at all levels, from IT, obviously usually viewed as a custodian, all the way to the senior management executive and all the way to the board. So certainly that's I've seen this almost very prevalent across all different industries, regulated or not. Having said that, the maturity of how the boards involve security, I think, still varies, right? So in the regulated industries such as banking, financial services, certainly there's a mandate require a structured approach to manage the cyber risk, whereas private organizations, smaller, especially as SMB type of business, is often viewed as okay, we know there's a ransomware because everyone's talk about it's being viewed as a material risk, but these view openly is a point system, right? It's a point problem to address, not holistically. How do we manage cyber risk? We usually conversation in the small company become how do we solve this problem, as opposed to how do we manage the risk holistically. So that's kind of my viewpoint. It depends the size of the type of industry and the size of the company.
Yeah, Ashley. So what were your thoughts on it? Obviously there's a bit of a stereotype about business people that they only care about cybersecurity after the data's already been hacked or stolen or whatever. So yeah, what's your view on that?
Thank you. I think this is changing. I think the poll question shows that the answer is not yes, they don't care about anything. They do care about it, because that comes to a balance now that people are aware. Business people are aware of the major problems, major risks. If you think about the largest concerns for an organization right now, is one of the biggest one is falling a victim to a cyber attack, which can be found or cannot be found, as we discussed. And also they are aware, I think, that this significant breach can result in monetary loss, reputational damage, and drain in resources because they need to resolve this problem as quickly as possible. So they are aware of those as well. And as also we had just past the pandemic, and the number that I had in mind was cyber crimes increased 600% during the early months of COVID-19, and that they are thinking that will cost the world maybe an estimated $10.5 trillion by 2025. So actually people are aware of these things, and they know these numbers. We don't know if this will happen, but when the picture is like this, when the numbers are like that, it is very difficult for business people to ignore the situation and ignore these risks, especially the reputational damage and the drain in the resources, because they will need to do something about this. And also, so there are lots of legislations are coming from my side. Legislation comes in, and they have to do something. They need to put policies in place, the processes in place, because the law is actually directing them to do that. And it's not only in the UK or in a country that the business is established, it's globally happening. So there are lots of changes here. So I don't want to say that they ignore, because I think the poll is right there, putting this situation to balance now.
Definitely. Just going back to something Joachim said earlier, you said it was something along the lines of a lot of business people have seen people hacking in movies and on TV shows and stuff like that. So they've got a certain idea about how it works, which is probably not very realistic. So what are some of the sort of main misconceptions you've encountered over your time of how these attacks, are commonly understood in the public imagination and what actually happens? Go on, Henry. Oh, sorry, whoever. I thought Henry unmuted himself there. But
Oh yeah, sure. So, yeah. I actually being through that, right, I was, I watched a lot of those movies, right, from the old days in the 90s. The Net by Sandra Bullock, right. I paid attention to the detail IP address she typed in with a 345, right. That's technically not impossible. So I'm always interested in watching this movie and relate to, hey, what do we do? I think most common misperception with even today is in this movie, obviously for the dramatic purpose, it's always portray how easy for some hacker able to deeply penetrate a computer system, which is in reality that's not the case, right? As we know, the target attack, nation state sponsored, takes a lot of effort. So it's not trivial if somebody able to gain access to your personal phone. Not to say it's impossible, but it would be very difficult. What's related to? So as a regular consumer, myself included, there's actually very simple thing to do to prevent cyber attack. Number one, patch your systems. It's your home phone, home computer, your grandmother's computer running Windows 2000. Get rid of it or buy a new version and patch it. I think the patching the system, whether it's your mobile device or computer, would effectively stop over 90% of cyber attack. The second is your credential, right? Brute force attack is almost impossible unless you have a quantum computer like NSA is using allegedly, right? And you're targeted, it's become probability. But regular consumers like ourselves, attackers usually exploit the human vulnerability. Means, right, we tend to trust people, right? So you tend to trust the website presented to you is real. So, just common sense, right? Able to detect phishing attempts, email or phone call. It will also block most attacks. Second factor authentication is available everywhere. Use that. I think, right, patching, identity, you should be able to stop majority, I think 99% of cyber attacks. So unlike what the movie, right, it's very difficult to do target attack.
Yeah, they just sort of type into a keyboard and then the computer sort of opens itself up. Anyway, go on, Joachim.
I think the other biggest misconception is that hackers are the lone wolves that sit in the basement wearing a hoodie and typing frantically on a green screen or no green typeface on black background. And I think that the big misunderstanding here that most cybercrime is organized crime. So it's like a company and you have a boss and you have software developers, you have people in operations, you have people working in finance to launder the money at the end. So it's a highly, let's say, specialized and organization, but also ecosystem where even if I don't have any hacking skills, I can go into the dark web and buy the skills. So if I want to, let's say, do a DDoS attack, I just rent a DDoS network for a couple of hours and attack whatever victim I want to target. And if I want to have a malware, I can go to a malware testing service and test it against all the AV software out there. So it's highly professionalized, and everything that you can do, let's say in the normal business world in terms of outsourcing and let's say having scalable services that you can purchase and SaaS solutions, all of that is also possible in the cyber world. And I think that is a new perspective for a lot of people because they always think about that highly skilled individual, etc. And they often also don't understand how much resources are available in that kind of organized crime world. Or if you think nation state attacks, because a lot of times the misconception is, how would they know this? Or how should they test every system that we have? And it's like, okay, just look at the logs of our, let's say, systems, how many web crawlers are going across our estate every day to, let's say, map our organization. And so I think this is the big misconception that there's always the one single attacker out there. And yeah.
And also, if I may add, I completely agree. So these are actually organized crimes, and they need so much of the resources and possibility to do an attack, especially at a certain level. But also there is a human factor, I think, that we always talk about the compliance part. The employees or people, they actually give some of the information away on social media. They just freely provide the information, and they are just freely doing mistakes on the systems, and that causes not a maybe cyber attack, as we discussed about the way that organized crime, but then they cause a problem to the systems or the companies because of their faults or their mistakes, or maybe not being able to think straight that whether this is a common sense, not to use right password or not. The human effect is there as well. So we need to be able to separate those two when we talk about cyber attacks and the cyber crime.
definitely.
I just want to add one more observation. In the recent years, it's become fairly low effort for organized criminals to launch ransomware or any cyber attacks, because there's a proliferation of ransomware as a service, as example, right? But they leverage the same infrastructure, AWS example, to build infrastructure. You can subscribe to exactly what type of services you needed to do, whether it's a malware, right? Package the malware, deliver, ransom payment. All this becomes supply chain. It's reality. So those criminals become, as you said, it's become a professional rank organization. Some of them even have SLA, right? If a ransom does not work, you get your money back. So it's really challenging for us, right, on the other side of this line, to defend this massive size of organization, and in some cases actually well run.
We had an interesting question in from the audience. What are some of the misconceptions about what sort of companies might be targeted? Like what might have you stand out as a good target?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that attacks are targeted on organizations specifically. I think oftentimes the target is what is the least protected company. So it's more like you look at the bike rack at the train station, you look which bike is the most expensive and doesn't have a lock. I mean, that's the type of attack that is most prevalent, I think. So it's not really targeted per se. It just looks for the weakest link in the chain, or it just looks for an opportunity to break into a system. And when you break into the system, then you find out what company you have just breached, and you find out how to make money out of it. And so the misperception is, since the movies typically think about nation state attacks or target attacks where you hack into the bank because you want to steal money, the hackers go the other way. They try to find systems, and if it's a bank, they're breaking the bank. I think that's the big misconception there. And the other part is also a lot of the attacks can also be, let's say, if you think about NotPetya, it's collateral damage. I mean, it was a cyber war attack on Ukraine, but it harmed hundreds of companies all across the globe because they had a branch office in Ukraine. That's it. And not really targeted per se.
Yeah, just throw as much against the wall and see what sticks, basically, I suppose. I suppose we should move on to our second topic now. We could carry on talking about this for hours, obviously, but we'll try and get through as much of the agenda as we can. So I've got another poll for everyone first. So this is how challenging do you find it to keep up to date with regulations and legislation related to data integrity? 1 is very easy, 5 is very hard, and everything in between. So I'll launch that now. And while the poll's going on, I've got a question for Asli. So we heard a little bit about keeping systems and software up to date in terms of, the operating system and stuff like that. But how important is it to have standardized software and hardware that everyone across the organization works from? So, making sure that people don't use their own personal laptops and stuff like that. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Joe. Well, it is important to have enough technology. I think I always say software and hardware being standardized and useful for the business. I always advise the business, don't get the highest, most expensive software or hardware, but buy the one that is actually useful for your business. And even that, it's not enough, because if your employees, if your people don't know how to use this technology, don't know how to use this software, and they're not aware of the processes and policies are in place, then you will not be actually preventing compliance matters. They will come up and they will become a problem for the company. So there must be a balance between the technology, software, hardware that you are actually standardizing in the company, and the right internal practices and employee training in the company. If there is not, then I always say in the business that there will be someone creating a problem, and that problem, because there are processes in places that they don't know about, that problem will come and bite you again, because the regulators and lawmakers and courts will ask that okay, you have standardized everything and you have got policies and processes that are in place, but why this has happened? And you would say the only answer you would give, sorry, that was a car passing by, and the only answer that you will give is that because they were not aware of the policies and processes, and that will be actually against your defense, and that will not help you during the legislative process. And just a poll question, maybe I can comment, how challenging do you find? I really want to see people's answers on that, because to me, I won't say my opinion, but to me, that's a very important question. Also, making the software, hardware, and the legislation balance the knowledge in place in a company.
Let's have a look then, shall we? So only 1% say they find it very easy to keep up to date with the regulations. That's to be expected. Well done for whoever that is. Yeah, I mean, obviously the majority of people are in the middle, but there's definitely quite a strong weighting towards people that find it difficult rather than easy.
That is, if I may add, yeah, that was what I was expecting, thankfully, because that I am struggling. I'm a lawyer. I'm struggling to keep up with the legislations and improvements, because this is happening globally. The US, you are aware of, the US is doing a lot of changes in the cybersecurity and data protection area, and amendments, and the new bills are coming, and you know, they're trying to keep up and actually be one step ahead in the legislative side, as well as the EU and the case law. So it's a very challenging environment at the moment. The countries are in a race to make their place in this war. This is the new way of actually fighting, that how they can regulate their system, which is a very important point for us all, I think.
I don't know if anyone else had any comments on that issue, like the issue of regulations ramping up, and maybe where you think the regulation's going next. Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
I would just say that you know, more regulation certainly brings out the challenge, especially in the US, right? Because we have a 50 state, each state has a different privacy law. As in Europe, you have a single GDPR, which is very nice. That said, if you look at the meat behind regulation, they are more or less written the same way, right? So I think one approach, which we have to a long time ago, you take the most restrictive regulation in the US. Usually it's either California or Massachusetts. You take those sort of vanguard of the regulation, and you apply your practice based on that, and you usually should be able to handle most of the similar type of regulation, right? I think GDPR also raises the bar substantially on the privacy side because there's enforcement, right? There's a penalty applied if you don't conform with that. So yes, it's a difficult, but if you do the right thing, right? If you have a good framework, you have a good practice, I think it's not as overwhelming you might think, because the controls, the requirements are very much similar.
Joachim, I had a question for you. On the training side, in terms of getting all the employees up to code in terms of keeping their data integrity as up to date as possible, what would be some of the things you'd recommend to people in terms of training their people up?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think it's not an easy answer. So I think it really depends, and for me, it goes back to the why. So why do you need data integrity or quality? So first step is really finding out what are the motivators for your organization. So to get your organization motivated, and really also to focus on what specifically about integrity or quality is important for you. So is it compliance related? So you have SOX requirements in United States. You have maybe business requirements. Think of a bank, let's say the integrity of their ledgers. You have maybe a company that really depends on big data. So it's more a strategic important, business importance. And then also looking, let's say, a bit on the threat impact landscape. Okay, what are the things that might impact data quality or integrity? Is that outside attackers? Is it internal attackers? What will be the impact? Is it regulatory? Will it be the stock price impact, financial loss, etc.? Are you looking to target accidental or intentional data corruption. And that also drives the questions, how much can you invest and how much quality is required? But going back to your question, I mean, things on the IT side, it can start from, let's say, basic, let's say IT hygiene, like COVID or ITIL, where you say, let's have proper processes around change management, about, let's say, securing the systems, how do you administrate the system? It can go a bit more in the data governance realm, where you say, okay, we need data governance training, data privacy, or things like data retention policies. So how do you, as an organization, manage your data? And then also, of course, the classical security trainings for your systems engineers or security teams like CISSP, CISM. SANS has a lot of trainings, etc., for the technology arena. But then you might also have, let's say, a bit more business, more product or role specific trainings. Think about SAP implementing segregation of duties, etc. So more like business rules implemented in the systems, where then it's more what kind of systems are needed to be secured for integrity purpose. And then there's also, let's say, a lot of the stuff will also happen on the business side. So, I mean, I typically look at the IT side of things or cyber side, but to implement something on the IT side, you also need business rules. I mean, you have to have a structured process. Who decides, let's say, certain steps? So think about segregation of duty or assessing data quality, what data will be imported, etc., how it will be imported, who validates that on the business side, etc. So I think there are many different, let's say, ways to look at it, how to ensure, let's say, integrity and quality of your data.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, really, and lots of people will have different answers, I suppose, won't they? We had an interesting question here from Shola. Thank you, Shola. I know this is something you're interested in, Henry, so maybe you could field this one. With more companies working remotely globally, can you talk more about bring your own device to work?
Sure. With the BYOD, bring your device to work, we call that BYOD. It makes a lot of sense to enable that, right? So it's a cost prohibitive for a company to procure a hardware mobile device for every employee. At Diligent, we support obviously company managed device as well as BYOD, right? So with the BYOD, there's a couple of things we needed to be concerned. One is, where is the parameter, where is the boundary between your personal, right, information, which we know that mobile device contains tons of sensitive information that we have no rights to access, versus the information that we are responsible for, right? So it's very important to establish a policy to define, okay, what kind of data can we manage on your personal device? And usually you do that in the policy attestation, it's update, right? You chose to use a BYOD by allowing organization, for example, to manage the data we own. Usually this means email system, right? So that's one part. At the policy, you need to clearly define what can you do, you cannot. For example, we were as a BYOD, we were never able to track your GPS location, access your personal phone, photos, so on and so forth. That has to be established very clearly in the policy. On the technical control, usually you need to implement a technical control we call MAM, mobile device management, MDM, or mobile application management. In the BYOD, the mobile application management, usually it's a choice, because it's a platform of choice, because you only manage the data. For example, Outlook email, right, is the only email system we support on the BYOD. So when you want to communicate, when you want to use BYOD for business, you have to use a selected email client. And we manage that, which means if you lost your phone, we can wipe the data remotely. Now, we're not going to touch your other email client you use on your personal device. So there's both technical elements, how you implement a solution to support that, as well as define that on the privacy side, what can you not see on a personal device.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and probably one that's relevant to an awful lot of people, because there's probably more companies having people use their own devices.
Yeah, I think the common myth, people sometimes get a little bit defensive, like, why I should use my personal phone for business. First of all, you don't have to, it's a choice. And the second, if you use that, right, the limit, what organization can manage is rather limited. I think this kind of safety net, you need to put a safety net out to ease the concern. It really, BYD is to enable you as an individual to be more productive. No one want to carry more, 3 devices, right? So I think you need to highlight the benefit, yet maintain confidentiality and integrity of the data.
Definitely, yeah. All right, so we should move on to our third topic now, I think. So it's the role of technology, but more broadly, it's about how the sort of cybersecurity side can liaise with legal people and other people within the business, maybe a bit more closely. So we've got a poll related to that, which I will start now. How early are cybersecurity issues taken to the company's legal team? 1 being immediately, 5 being too late. Hopefully not too many people will say number 5. So I will start off by asking Aslia, what would you say is the most effective guidance you can give for how legal and security teams should work together?
Well, I always try to put my hand up saying, I'm happy to learn. I'm happy to actually understand what are the changes in the technology. I think as lawyers, we need to know that, because any change can actually affect any liability limits and contractual work, compliance matters. So I think there are the best way of communicating with the security or any department, actually any stakeholder, is communication. So they shouldn't be seeing lawyers that, oh, you're just focusing on the legislation and legislative work and regulatory or policy work. Because if we don't know the technological developments, if we don't understand the systems of the company, then it's very difficult for us to actually negotiate a contract and put a certain policies in place and standards, as Joachim explained very rightly, that they need to actually understand what is happening in the company and the technology side. So we need to be actually communicating well, because in the previous topic, we talked about the legislation, and we have got some legislative frameworks, the GDPR talks about, and the new US security legislation coming in, we talked about it. But there are some legislations at the moment, they talk about whether a company should be paying the ransomware attacker some money or not. And as far as I know, in New York and Hawaii, they actually prohibited the payment to the attacker, because they need to not pay this money and then continue this crime to happening. So they said, we can't fund the attackers, and we have to bring this as a law. So legislative side, there's a lot of changes as well, so as well as the technological side. Therefore, I always say that if you can involve the lawyers at the beginning of the conversations, any changes, any implementations, please do so. And also sometimes the understanding on the security side, IT guys are different than the legal people. They think that they are buying a piece of software, an application, and that will actually make companies' life much easier, employees' life much easier. But that has a part that will change the compliance issues. Maybe they will allow to collect more data from the devices from people, or they will be sharing, employees will be sharing their data with that type of program, but maybe that's missed by the IT department. So that's why I think we need to start working together, collaborating together as partners and stakeholders, and as early as possible, asking the questions. Even the stupid questions are welcome, because we may ask stupid questions to the IT team, and they may ask that, well, I don't have no idea actually what this affects, but this is what we are trying to do. Do you see anything? I think when we start with that conversation, I think that will be much easier for both sides.
I just want to add, in practice, in the diligence security, legal is the group I talk on a daily basis. This morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, my Slack channel was from legal, right? So you really need to build that partnership. as a cyber practitioner, we're not lawyers, right? I never pretend to understand the regulation to the full extent that my legal counsel would do. Even though I think I know the answer, I always defer my question to legal. I can give some high-level interpretation, but the final interpretation always resides in legal. That's number one. Number two, in the incident response procedure, which is a written document every company should have, you should outline the how the incident is detected, defined, declared, and from that point, which team need involved. This has to be prescriptive, because if you don't do that, we are human beings. Under pressure, you forgot. Oh, I forgot to tell legal. I forgot to tell marketing. So have that written up. It's a simple, really simple flow chart would do. So in our procedure, for example, right, once the incident is declared by security, because we have to use the IOC indicator for compromise to understand it's a real incident, not just a hypothetical is one, right? So that belongs to the cyber team. Once the commander, the incident handler declared the incident, the next thing you need to do is legal. So you have to written that in your policy and repeat that process over and over again.
Thanks for the support, Henry. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I meant, because I just want to add one thing. There's a tremendous effort now bringing the common terms and definitions in cybersecurity matters and data protection matters. I think all over the world, they're trying to understand each other with the common terms and definitions, which is so important, because if we understand each other, if we work as a partner, we need to speak the same language. And there are laws now coming up with we will use only this definitions, only these terms, so we won't actually lose time to explain ourselves of what's the problem. And that is a key for being a partner and establishing a partnership, speaking the same language, so that we need to invest time and effort on that.
Obviously, working together is the effectively is the ideal situation, but it's easy to get wrong. People get siloed and all that sort of stuff. So interesting to have a look at the results of this poll. Quite encouraging, really. The answers are definitely weighted towards the legal team being included earlier rather than later. Do you reckon that does that sort of chime in with your guys' experience, or I don't know? What do you think? Is that the? Do we just have a lot of very competent companies watching this webinar, or is this generally representative, do you think?
I would say in general, I think the legal teams are also compliant. When you think about data protection in Europe, I mean, I think there's a very close collaboration, because we know there's a very, very, let's say, important connection there. And we support us mutually, I would say, in our endeavors. And so, for example, we also have that in our incident process, that all the incidents after they're being declared, they're automatically forwarded, and we have a close collaboration. Even on the ticket system, they're directly integrated, because we feel that so much interaction is needed, that they need to be aware of what is going on. If an incident develops, that they also have the latest news if they want to have it on their side. So that's something that we, for example, do.
Definitely. I had another question for you, Joachim, actually. So this is all a matter of probabilities, right? The business people have to take some risks in order to, it's just how business works, isn't it? Risks must be taken. No course of action is 100% secure. But as someone who is in charge of the security of the organization, how much do you have to allow yourself to put that to one side sometimes and take a sort of practical approach?
Well, I think it's very important that the business understands that we can't be 100% secure. And as you said, running a business is always taking risks. And when they ask us, are we secure? It's like, if we want to be secure, just close the door, then we are a secure company. Otherwise, there will always be risk. Yeah? And of course, as you said, we have to bring it down to, let's say, a practical level. But this also depends a bit on what kind of company you're thinking about. I mean, if you're working in the banking world or insurance world, as Henry already said, it's quite natural for them to speak about risk, to manage risk. I mean, they have hundreds of years of experience, let's say, doing risk management and have strong processes around that. Well, if you're working in a manufacturing industry or something like that, risk is not a, let's say, a well well-practiced process, for example. So for them, especially in those types of industries, it's really important to let's say, have a practical discussion around that, about scenarios, what could happen, what would be the impact. And I think what also often happens is to kind of bring this magical cyber world into, let's say, what would be the physical equivalent, and just to make it, let's say, tangible, to say, okay, what does risk management mean? I mean, I typically have analogies or pictures or example incidents to relate the risk that we have, and how does it look when you drive a car at the morning, and what does risk avoidance means? It means it's snowing out, I'm not taking the car today. That's a risk avoidance. I'm just not doing it. Yeah. And let's say risk mitigation is buying a set of winter tires and not using it in winter. And so a lot of times you have to come up with practical ways how to speak with the business and get away from a lot of the security jargon and a lot of the technicalities or theoretical, let's say, models, which are all right in the security world, or if you're speaking to security professionals or risk management professionals. But when you speak to the business, oftentimes you have to take a bit more pragmatic, a practical approach to that, I would say.
Definitely.
I just want to add, right, to a more of a prescriptive way to build that conversation with the whether it's a board or audit committee or ERM, is develop a comprehensive risk acceptance statement, which is really the business owns that. For example, right, when I work at the bank, there's like no more than 10 risk acceptance statement, right? For example, what is the tolerance of material data leakage? That should be 0, right? No company should say, oh yeah, I'm okay to accept 1 occurrence per year. That should be 0. However, unintentional data leakage, we know that happens, right? You know, email, I send a wrong email to wrong customer, it happens on a daily basis. It's not really realistic to have 0 occurrence of the unintentional data leakage. But what is the tolerance? Is a 5 per month? Depends on population, right? It's related to the user. That's a meaningful conversation, which means if the audit risk management committee says that number should be no more than 1% of population, then you need something to do. You need to implement controls, whether it's a training, technical controls to stop that. Whereas if the risk level is somewhat acceptable, you have a different approach, address problems, right? So I think that's example how you take the risk management conversation, define them more clearly, and have a conversation with your executive leadership team. Because as Johan said, not all risk can be avoided or mitigated. Yeah.
Just on that subject as well, Henry. So, what would be? You said that you could put some technical controls to, stop that particular problem. Are there any other sort of technology solutions that you'd sort of you think would be particularly effective in preventing data breaches and or data being erroneously shared and that sort of thing?
It's a very difficult problem. I know back in the days, right, I was a big proponent of DLP, data leakage prevention systems. I can tell you that do not work. Just because the data pattern, right, is use a computer detect patterns, it takes a lot of resource on the computer, and there's false positive rate is very high. So really, there's no magic technical solution yet I've seen to be effectively, let's say, have efficacy rate of over even, 95%. Having said that, it's a training, right? It's what we call non-technical control, training, awareness. Sometimes you have to do enforcement, which means if a person repeatedly perform this action, and it's a violation for company policy. With that, first we have to have established, right? You can't enforce something or penalize someone when you don't have a policy. That's why policy is very important. If the policy violation has been repeatedly detected, then sometimes you have to thinking about, right, what is enforcement action looks like. In the bank, it's very common you send a letter through legal team, right, compliance, to the individual saying, okay, here's a letter of education. You get off this one time. If it happens again, it's elevated, become a letter of reprimand. You got 3 letters, you could be subject to termination, right? Now, you use that as a tool, but you don't use it every day, but you have to kind of make judgment call when you're going to elevate, right? For some people, just repeatedly not carrying security, then you need to elevate this process. And I know many banks in the US, if you have 3 breach, and you could be terminated just like that. Yeah.
Again, it goes back to the human factor, doesn't it? Which is so yeah. I don't know. We're always the weakest link, whether it's
But I want to add something, if I may.
Go ahead.
Henry's point was the right one, because this is a risk management, legal and security risk management. And that book that Henry described needs to be worked out together with the legal and the business. So they should know what are the risks and how much of the tolerance will be actually given by the company. So those decisions should be made earlier, and that will take away the pressure on lawyers, on the legal team, that they should be maybe saying that, well, you can't do that really, because this is, according to me, it's too risky. But if there is a standard about risk and there's a standard about the liability, then everyone will know where the stop point is, where the line is. So they don't want to convince the lawyers and saying that we should be able to do that, right? Because that's what we are facing for. This is completely a security issue or a commercial matter, but they want us to approve the risk and the liability level, which is wrong. We use this technique also in the commercial contracts or any contracts as a playbook. So we know as lawyers, where is the company's limitation in the liability, insurance, and various areas. So actually making an informed decision about these risks. And in the risk management, an informed decision is an essential point. Therefore, when, as we said, when we are working in partnership with the IT team, security team, and if we have got the standard, this book in place, then there is no problem. I think business can have the issues, but we know, we are aware of those issues, then we can solve it. Otherwise, it is actually up to whoever looked at that matter on the business side or a legal side, which is not a very advisable way to go in the business.
It's interesting because when we do the tabletop on different cyber scenario, the first page on the purpose of tabletop, we say the tabletop is a low pressure environment with a no fault to encourage people to speak up. It's so important you place that in the very beginning of the tabletop, right? Because low pressure and a no fault. When the real incident happens, as Ashley said, it will tremendously help to reduce the stress level, because you already know what you need to do. Yes, every incident has a nuance, but you're operating within the framework you're already familiar with, right? Itself is a hugely beneficial. I literally went through this, all the time. So I can tell you, it's not just hypothetical; it's reality. Yeah.
Right. So final topic here, and we're going quite broad for this one. We're talking about the cybersecurity threat environment in general, and I'm really interested to get the audience's thoughts on this poll. So this is it. Are there any particular types of cybersecurity threat that particularly concern you? And you can tick more than one for this one. So while the audience answers that one, I will address a question to Joachim. So we've seen that it does look like, I'm sure you would agree, the cybersecurity threats are growing in general. What are the main factors that feed into this, in your opinion?
Well, I think one big part is, of course, the attractiveness in terms of potential gains as an attacker. So, I mean, as we're doing a lot of digital transformation, especially now through the COVID phase, a lot more investments were done in the digital arena. The companies are transforming all their processes into the digital world. A lot more, let's say, digital native businesses. So a lot more revenue is being generated through IT or in the cyberspace. And that, of course, means from an attacker's perspective, I can create much more impact. I can earn more money. If you think ransomware or stealing information or just damaging a business. So I have bigger impact, and that means it's a much better business for an attacker to be in. That will drive a lot more threats, of course. And this is for hackers, for hacktivists. If you think cyber warfare, all of them are looking for the best let's say, impact for the investment, basically. And the other part is, of course, since technology is evolving faster every day. I mean, the product cycles or the technology cycles are really increasing. And that means at the same time also our attack surface is increasing, because we have more devices, we have more technologies out there. We still have legacy technologies. So it's also the attack surface overall is really increasing day by day. And if then also look at one particular interesting part is when we think about real digital native companies, think of Uber. There is no paper alternative to Uber. I mean, if I look at our company, we could do some stuff with paper and pencil, but Uber, there is no Uber without IT anymore. And so I think that's something going forward. When you think about real digital native companies, digital process, digital business models, there is no way to work without IT. And that means attacks have a much, much higher impact. And that will just be so much more attractive to any attackers out there.
Right, let's have a look at these poll results. So, obviously this won't add up to 100%, but it seems like phishing is actually the largest concern. Ransomware is lower than I thought it would be, I must say, considering how much it's been in the news, and maybe it's seen as something that only affects large companies. I don't know. Asla, do you want to comment on the poll results?
Sure. I think I really didn't want to choose one or provide, highlight one. The reason is, as we explained, Joachim Henry clearly explained that this is not most of the time targeted attack. So this is what they're doing. They're trying their best, and they're trying to find the most, the whole system that they can come in. And the holes and the systems are actually created by the end user. So I'll bring it to the user and human mistakes effect side. So I'm more concerned as a lawyer about the people who are not aware, who using the system badly, and password control is not there, all sorts of things that they can do, is the biggest threat for the businesses still, because we make mistakes. We are all humans, and we are making mistakes, and all those mistakes coming together. IT team is making a mistake. Maybe sometimes, they're not patching the system, or they're creating holes as well. So those mistakes are the biggest threat for me. And the only prevention for this is, as Joachim explained, that you need to take the technological steps. Yes, also train the people that you have, that they are aware of the processes and policies and in your company, and try to accept that there will be some attacks, there will be some cybersecurity issues, but you did your best to actually cover those risks, and you are aware of the risks that you're carrying. That's the thing that I thought when this question came up.
So it seems to me like, obviously, like the human factor is the most important, but are the majority of companies that are affected by malware and things like that, is it mainly from emails, or is it from employees maybe going on sites they shouldn't and things like that? Do you have like a breakdown on that sort of thing, or I don't know if any of you know about how the sort of infection gets into the company usually. May
I just say, for the data breaches, so the loss of data, I came across most, I think, either they're using the sites that they shouldn't be using while they're working. Their employees, and some companies are trying to prevent that, by not allowing certain social media websites or other sites into that, but they do, or they're using those systems carelessly. So they didn't actually put the right password in. They create a problem for themselves. But when they create a problem for themselves, what they forget most of the time is you're working on a computer that belongs to your employer, and actually they've got some system, and maybe your data is that you're putting away or you're creating a problem with, but then the result is most of the time is more damaging to the business, because with that information they create some other channels, they can get more information, they can steal more stuff from the company, and that creates a reputational damage. So I don't know about that detail about, maybe Henry and Joachim can help on the ransomware and phishing, but this is happening on the data side, data breach side. What I also support, I think Joachim mentioned that, the best learning curve because of this reason, the best learning curve is actually mock phishing attacks or attacks that are planned by the IT team to show how the systems can be used, why they shouldn't be using certain website, how it's easy for them to get the information, the data of the company from the users. And that's only with the mock trials and the tests showing them that is the reality.
So I'm going to ask, we've got time for one more question, I think. I'm going to put the final poll up while we do it, which is basically, if you would like to learn a bit more about how Diligent can help you get through some of these threats, let them know and they'll get in touch with you. Yeah, Henry, so what do you think is the prognosis for cybersecurity over the next, let's say, short to medium term? Obviously, regulation improves, gets more stringent as time goes on. People taking it more seriously, so that's promising. But there are more threats out there. So yeah, what I don't know. How do you see it playing out in the sort of medium term?
I think the cyber landscape, to some degrees, this almost a cliche, we're changing, right? We probably all went to webinar, the title, ever-changing cyber landscape. It's true to some degree, but the attack types is really fundamentally hasn't changed, right? In the past 10 years, right? It's exploit human vulnerability, exploit the vulnerability presented on the system. If for anything, I think really if you just put all your effort on protecting your assets, meaning end user devices, right? We call device hygiene, server protection, human training. Those are actually evidence proves that those are very effective controls, regardlessly what actually we call technique, right? TTP, right? Technique and procedures that hacker would use. The TTP will change, almost every month, right? Because new tools being developed. But the method they're using, the fundamental issue they are trying to, exploit hasn't changed. Is system vulnerability plus human vulnerability. To some degree, I think it's a solvable problem and actually require quite a bit of very boring work on the IT side, patching, train your user. There's no magic bullet, regardless of what cybersecurity vendor tells you. We all in this together. It's hard work. Yeah, it's boring, tedious, and hard work. Unfortunately, it's not exciting as you see in the movie, right? Rushing Chinese hacker, brought down your system. It probably happens, but not as a frequency as we think that they are.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for watching this webinar. Once again, it's thank you from me and all of our panelists here and Diligent for helping us make this put together. So hope to see you all next time. Thanks once again for tuning in for Legal 500 webinar, and have a great rest of your respective days. Goodbye, everyone.